Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, having difficult conversations that matter in tough times with Andrea Newton. We talk about having the courage to walk away from anything that isn't right for you, having the balls to have crucial conversations that could be the difference between life or death, and just like we all have dental health, we all have mental health.
With over 25 years as a qualified trainer, combining leadership development skills with real-life experience, Andrea helps organisations create and maintain mentally healthy workplaces where people can thrive and perform to a high standard. Organisations who recognise that health and safety isn't just hard hat and high vis, but realise that their duty of care extends to mental health and psychological safety too. Andrea works in a very practical, no-nonsense way, helping people feel comfortable with subjects as sensitive as suicide. She's currently on a mission to help managers create a positive climate where people can flourish and deliver. Okay, so this is our first remote podcast.
Ooh, it is.
With Andrea, who is in Warrington. Yes, I got that right. So it's definitely something we begin with the W. So it was Warrington, Wigan, Washington. I don't know. So it's coming to you from Wide Open to Warrington. So, Andrea, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No. And if I ever do grow up, then maybe I'll work it out. But I think I went through lots of things, from being a vet so that I could fix animals, but then I realised that sometimes they didn't recover. So I realised emotionally I'd be pretty rubbish at that. And then I think at one point I wanted to be a teacher, but that might have just been because I'd got a blackboard for Christmas or something. So no, I never really had any idea. And even after I graduated, I still had no clue. I was just I just moved through education based on circumstance because I did well at this. So I did more of that. And that took me to doing a degree in languages, which I don't even use anymore. So no, I had no clue. But I grew up in a house where achievement was critical. And that anything less than perfect just wasn't good enough. So I suppose in some ways that also influenced that I did what I did because I was good at that stuff, but not necessarily stuff that was going to be my career or that I'd enjoy. And I've actually gone from, when I first graduated, I worked in recruitment, which had nothing to do with my education, but I spent 3 years recruiting engineers. And then moved into a sales role, and then became a sales manager, which took me into training my sales team, which then took me into a more generalist HR role, which then brought me out of industry completely, and I've been self-employed for the last 20 years. So this absolutely was not where I intended to be. But in fairness, I'm not sure that I ever had a clear intention in mind.
What got you to make the leap then from being employed to self-employed?
In some ways, I didn't really have a lot of choice. The company that I work for, we had a new chief exec appointed who was French, and who very much believed that women were either decorative or administrative.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I didn't fall into either of those categories. And really, to survive in his regime, I would have had to have taken my career back 8 years to sort of fit in. He didn't want any females in senior manager roles. Wow. So they offered me a deal to help me go quietly. And interestingly, every other female in senior management roles left within 18 months of my going. So I'm glad to say it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
So I came out of the corporate world, and basically, I guess like a lot of people, started to look for the same job somewhere else. And I was going for interviews and coming away thinking, if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. I'm not that fussed either way. And that made me start thinking, actually, is this really what I want to do? Because as much as I'm being offered these fantastic positions in terms of salaries and benefits and all of that, none of them are exciting me.
Yeah.
And it was purely by fluke that a company that I'd used to do some consultancy work when I was employed approached me and said, here, you're not working at the moment. Do you want to do a couple of freelance days for us? Keep your hand in, keep some money coming in. The offer's there. And so I started to do it and thought, oh, you know what? I really quite like this. I really quite like going different places, working with different people, doing different stuff, and having the freedom to say, not today, thank you. And that's how I kind of took the leap. So again, I don't think I've ever made a conscious decision in my life. I think it's always been circumstance that's presented themselves. And that's how I ended up, March 2000 going freelance.
What was the type of thing you were doing then?
At that time, I was doing a lot of HR consultancy work because my job in industry had been to support line managers. And more often than not, I did the difficult conversations that perhaps those line managers didn't want to have. So things like performance, absence management, if people were struggling, if people had got emotional, personal challenges that line managers would rather chew off their own arm than deal with.
Yep.
They'd kind of roll me out of the cupboard and I'd do that bit and then go away again. So in a lot of ways, difficult conversations has been my career. Some people might say I've started most of them, but I think that's unfair. So yeah, the art of the tough talk was kind of my bag. And so I did that with lots of different organisations, from media all the way through to the fire service.
Okay.
So you can guess which one of those was my most favourite client.
I don't know, Andrea. I have no idea.
So yes, that's me. Difficult conversations.
Okay. So what have been the sort of the biggest turning points, I suppose, in your 20 odd years of, actually 20 years, I wasn't very good at maths, of working for yourself?
I think my biggest turning point came not through anything that was work related, but I think the day my then husband was arrested for indecent exposure was probably a significant turning point, when you just start to question everything around you. You question systems, and you question relationships, and you question how well do you really know people. But you know that you have to go to work, because at that time I was the main breadwinner. In fact, I was the only breadwinner. In fact, there was only me that got up and went out in the morning to go to work. So I had to keep doing that. And life became very challenging at that point for me personally.
Yeah.
But I found a lot of respite in the work that I did, because that was my safe place. That's where I could be in control of what happened and how it happened. And also, if I'm really honest with my little self, that was where I got a lot of my self-worth, because the work that I did was making a difference for people, and people were appreciative of that. My home life was absolute shit at the time, if I can say that. And so work was the best place to be. And so I just put more and more of my energy into my business, into working with different people, and to just doing as much as I can that made me feel good about me, and luckily that also brought in a wage.
Okay. So when did that stop?
When did that stop in terms of?
So when did it all go horribly wrong? So husband arrested for indecent exposure. What was the impact, I suppose?
So after he was arrested, we then had probably about a 6-month period before it went to court, and eventually we got through all of that, and I couldn't look at him in the same way ever again. He was also the co-director in my business, which I think is the case for a lot of people who are married sole traders in that situation. So everything about my life was kind of tied up with that person, my work life, my home life, clearly the father of my child. He also did the accounts for a charity that I'd set up. There we go. There's another distraction that meant I didn't have to go home.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived for a long time, a whole kind of pretense. I played the game and I stayed safe. And my underlying intention was to protect my son.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to expose my son to what I knew was going to be a proper shitstorm when it kicked off. And so I put up with it. And, you know, it's really scary at the moment, you know, thinking about what's going on in the world today. If all of that had been going on for me and the coronavirus had have happened then, I'm not sure that I would still be alive today.
Mm.
And that's something else that concerns me in today's world, with people being told to stay at home and stay safe. Home isn't safe for everybody.
No.
You know, different people have got different circumstances at home. And for me, at that point, if I'd have been on that lockdown, I know that's not the word we're using, but it kind of expresses, I think, what we're feeling. If I'd have had that additional pressure on top of what was going on in my marriage and at home with the psychological and physical abuse, I wouldn't be here today to talk to you. And I think for me, that was the point at which it got to a point where I said, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't play this game anymore.
No.
I can't pretend. I was going out to work, putting my face on, standing up in front of a group, doing what I did, doing it really well. And then as the last person walked out of the door, I'd be on my knees crying. And I think the point came where I thought, I just can't carry on like this. I can't be driving home from a fabulous day of work and the anxiety suddenly started in my gut that I was going home. And I'd look for ways to delay going home so that I didn't have to walk into that environment. And I think that was the point that I had to have a word with myself and just admit that I needed to face the music. And one day I didn't play the script and it all came tumbling down. And to cut a very long and boring story short, I ended up going to court. I had to get a restraining order. I had to get an occupational order to protect my safety. My house got ransacked. All the accounts that we had that were in joint names got emptied before I even thought that somebody might do something like that. My son's savings that I'd been paying into for 20 years were stolen. That's the only word I can use because it certainly wasn't his to take.
No.
And that's the bit where you suddenly have a recognition that, you know what, sweetheart, you need to put your big girl pants on, you need to deal with this. You've been having difficult conversations all your life in terms of your career. This is probably the most difficult conversation that you're now ever going to have. And when it got to the point that I'd got Samaritans literally on speed dial, I think for me that was a turning point that I thought, you know what, I've got a whole load of skills that I've built up over the years that actually I could put to far better use than somebody being worried about the appraisal score that they just got from their manager. And I think the combination of my leadership development experience, the consultancy work that I'd done, and the fact that I was peering over the edge myself, somewhere in the darkness, I made a commitment that if I got through it, I would do something that meant other people didn't have to be in the place that I was in.
Yeah.
And so once I stepped back from the edge, I actually borrowed the money and I went and qualified as a suicide intervention tutor with the National Centre. And I guess that's the point at which, and this is going to sound really corny, that's the point at which I finally realised my purpose. Yeah?
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'd done a bloody good job supporting line managers and doing loads of leadership development and setting up appraisal systems and helping organizations recruit, all of that really good stuff I'd done. But there was always a golden thread that ran through it all, and that was about dealing with difficult conversations in tough times. How do we support people? How do we challenge where necessary but support where appropriate? How do I, as a manager, create a climate where people are psychologically safe and therefore can do their best? So I guess looking back now, without realizing it at the time, I was doing a lot of that stuff, but now I'm just doing it a lot more explicitly, and I'm hoping a lot more helpfully, if that's the word,
Yes.
For people that I am working with. And I'm just so grateful that my ship is now behind me, a long way behind me, because if my ship was happening right now with everything else that's going on in the world, I worry. I don't think I'd be alive.
Okay, so you go into organisations now and talk to them about mental health generally and first aid, not what's it called, suicide specifically. Sorry, totally muddled all my words up.
So what I do now is, in a lot of ways, it's pretty much what I was doing before. I'm working with managers and leaders and helping them to, first of all, have a much better understanding of mental health. Because as soon as you say mental health, some people automatically think about diagnosed mental illness, and they suddenly think you're going to start talking about things like, schizophrenia and bipolar and stuff like that. What we actually need to get people to realise is that every single one of us has mental health, just in the same way that we all have dental health. See what I did there? And it's just about recognising that as a human being, we know the stuff that we should be doing on a daily basis that takes care of our dental health, brushing and flossing and all of that. There's also stuff that we should be doing that's good for our mental health, because our mental health is nothing more than how we're thinking, how we're feeling. I don't need to tell you guys how you think affects how you feel, which in turn affects how you behave, which in turn creates habit, etc., etc. So mental health is just about how we're thinking, how we're feeling, and our mood is an indicator of our mental health. So I'm now going talking to managers and saying, have any of you ever had the experience of perhaps being in a house with a newborn baby that didn't sleep? Hopefully it was your baby and you were kind of just passing through, Getting people to recognise that even sleep deprivation can make our mental health poor, and something like a newborn baby that doesn't sleep, that's an everyday circumstance. Add into that mix somebody, perhaps they're worried about their wife because perhaps their wife's got postnatal depression, the hormones are screwed up after being pregnant. So we're now not getting any sleep, and we've got a partner who's perhaps behaving a little bit differently than usual. Add into that the fear that actually while this partner's at home and not working, financially we're having to survive on my single wage. So already in what is just an everyday life situation, somebody's mental health is potentially being affected. And so I'm helping managers to understand that mental health isn't some big scary thing. It's just another human condition. It's just like having a migraine. It's something that happens, and it's something that every single one of us is potentially at risk of poor mental health. Not because we've got a diagnosed mental illness, but because life throws shit at us. And sometimes there's just too much of it that we struggle to survive.
Yep.
And I think that was my biggest piece of learning in a very unhappy marriage with lots of stuff going on that was really stressful. There's nothing more stressful than your husband being arrested and social services rocking up on your door because it's their duty to make sure that the kid in the house, because somebody's been arrested for a sexual offence. So I suddenly had social services questioning my ability as a parent to keep my child safe. My own mental health, literally at that point, was under the biggest stress. And because I'd been working like a demon to avoid going home, I was already running on fumes. Put those things together, and no wonder, I kind of looked over the edge.
Yeah.
So I'm helping managers understand that, and hopefully helping them realise it isn't something to be scared of. And actually, with the right framework, they can have courageous conversations. They can have those crucial conversations with people that can be the difference between life and death. And I'm not saying that to kind of, glorify it. It literally can be. We know evidence-based research tells us as little as a 20-minute conversation can help somebody in crisis. Now, think about it. Where do we spend most of our lives? At work. Yeah. Work is probably the only real community that we have these days. We don't have communities in society in the way that we used to. People used to go to the local pub every night after work for a swift half, and they'd chat to people there, or they'd go to church on a Sunday, or, we now live places where people don't even know their neighbours' names, let alone have that sort of community spirit. So work you go to regularly. Geez, if you can't have an honest, open, frank conversation with somebody in that environment, where can you? Workplaces have a responsibility for health and safety. But when we talk about health and safety, everybody thinks about hard hat, high vis.
Holding on to handrails.
Holding on to handrails and,
reverse parking.
Don't walk around with a hot drink. And reverse parking, where did that come from all of a sudden? We didn't have reverse parking when I was a kid. There's all sorts of stuff now that when you talk about health and safety, that's what people think it is. But actually, organisations have a duty of care for people's mental health just as much as they do the physical health. So the work that I've done for 20 odd years with leaders about creating positive climate is actually part of that. It's about the psychological safety. It's about people being able to be honest, because as well as I do, if I cannot be my true authentic self, you're not going to get the best performance out of me. So in kind of a very long-winded but roundabout way, that's how I ended up where I am, a combination of almost 30 years professional experience mixed in with probably 16 years of shitty mental health that ended with me being on 3 lots of medication and needing professional support. Boom, that's me. I think what makes me different, though, in this particular space is that when I go in to talk to people, I talk to them in the way that I'm talking to you now. I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a therapist, and I don't pretend to be. I also don't want to train people to do that. What I want to do is train common garden folk in a no-nonsense, down-to-earth, no waffle, no bullshit way that goes, if you notice that a member of your team is struggling, grow a pair and have a conversation with them. I don't want you to fix them. I don't want you to be their problem solver. But what I want you to do is to have the balls to have a conversation so that you can signpost them to the help that they need. And I think that is probably one of the most critical things that any decent manager can ever do.
Yeah, and especially at the current time, when you think about it, you can, unless you totally have no empathy or you don't pick up on emotions and the like in the physical office. But as we're all now experiencing periods of isolation, yes, we've got these great tools to have online meetings and the like, but I'd imagine in essence everyone's putting on their sort of, what would you call it, your best phone call voice, and you look your best on a video conference for the team, because everybody can see you. And what you mentioned about everyone having their kids at home for whoever knows how long.
Having a bloody dog.
So we've got pets, we've got kids, so we've got to keep them busy.
Partners,
which might be good, might be bad. We have lots of funny stories of, I never realised my husband was such an arsehole, the way he sounds on the phone. Sharing offices, sharing the living room, the kitchen. You've got to juggle your job on top of everything without that social interaction in the same way. So you've got to say that there's a much higher chance, I mean, I'm speculating or hypothesizing here, that based on that scenario, this type of conversation is more so ever than is needed more so ever now than perhaps previously, because we're not physically in an office together.
Yeah, I think so. And, if you think about it, at the moment, there's so much uncertainty in the world that people who weren't struggling before now with their mental health perhaps are. Yeah. Uncertainty is very unsettling. The brain craves routine and structure and predictability. And at the minute, we've not got any of that. So, some of the work I've been doing since the virus, since the pandemic, is I've been doing some webinars and some cheat sheets for my clients to help them do exactly what you've just described, James. And, I'm really promoting the whole kind of stay safe, but stay sane. Suddenly putting people in that same house where they're sharing space, and suddenly they do realise that actually their husband is a bit of an arse. And they haven't got, they haven't got the opportunity to go to Fat Club and get away from it for a little while.
Yes.
So joking aside, I think at the moment there's a lot of stuff that, really does need a little bit more attention. The government are telling us everything that we need to keep ourselves physically safe. But the things that we're being asked to do for physical health, social isolation, distancing, staying at home, is potentially having a negative effect on our mental health. So for me, it's not just stay safe, it's also stay sane. So as I say, I've been sort of helping my clients with bits and pieces. One client particularly who I absolutely adore, she said to me, can you put together a little webinar? I don't want it to be work related. I want it to let our people know that we care, and I want us to share ideas with them to help them get through this. I want you to talk to them about their kids. I want you to talk to them about their domestic arrangements. I want you to talk to them about, them being anxious about relatives and so on, and really give us some useful advice. And what we're also doing with them is a little piece that's specifically for managers, that's absolutely as you describe. We know that working remotely is going to be different for a lot of people. And we know that communication is absolutely critical at any time that you're doing remote working. But even more so now, because we shouldn't just be focusing on people's work tasks, we should also be checking in with them personally. Our duty of care as a decent employer doesn't stop just because Boris says we've all got to work from home. So it's about the ability to have that conversation, to take 2 minutes on that video call to say, how are you doing? How are you getting on? How's the kids? Did you do PE with Joe Wicks this morning? How's your back?
We did.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm loving seeing the number of mums and dads that are doing that and complaining about it afterwards.
Oh yes, it's hilarious.
But it's kind of building that into the conversations that you should be having with your employees right now. And there I am, I'm back to my golden thread that's been all the way through my career, having difficult conversations that matter.
Yeah. And what about those who have to go to work? So the key workers who are terrified, the poor people that work in shops and the NHS and delivery drivers, they're so worried that they're going out to collect a virus and taking it home to infect their family. So how can employers help and check in with those guys?
Again, there's two things. If you look at both sides of the health and safety coin, obviously on the first side, there's the physical stuff. They should be doing things like the risk assessments and making sure that every single job has been, put through a risk assessment in terms of contact with other people, contact with sort of materials. Are they practicing good hygiene? Are they giving people the tools and the resources? I mean, I saw yesterday I don't know whether you've seen it, the charity fundraiser to get protective visors made, PPE, for NHS staff. We're having to do charity fundraisers to give people essential equipment so that they're safe to do their jobs, but that's just an aside. But yeah, so it's about employers looking after that, and I think in fairness most employers will get that, they'll understand that.
Yeah.
I think the trick that a lot of employers might be missing just now is how do we support our people during exceptionally stressful times. None of the checkout operators in Asda ever expected to have to break up a fight over a packet of toilet roll. That was never part of their job description. Nobody ever expected to get abuse from telling somebody that they could only have 4 cans of lager rather than the 28 party pack that they stacked out the trolley. So again, people who are working, who are under more stress, more pressure today than they've ever been, employers have a duty of care in that respect as well, to make sure that those people's mental well-being is also being addressed. So again, even if you're going out to work, the stay safe, stay sane applies to you too. And again, perhaps where people's anxiety is that they're going out to work, perhaps coming into contact with the virus and then going home to their families. It's even more so about, first of all, managing that anxiety, but secondly, also minimizing the risk by following all of the sort of health and hygiene guidelines. I mean, it was on the news yesterday where they talked about the virus can live in fabric. So it's things like using powder detergent that contains the bleach rather than lots of the liquid stuff that doesn't. It's about realizing that the virus can live in hair and facial hair. So, you know, men with beards, for example. So it's kind of all of those things physically. And that's where I see an employer's duty of care at the moment, but both sides of the health and safety coin.
Quick fire. You go.
It's onto the quick fire. So question number 1. So I'm a phone operator that can connect you with any person in the world. Who do you choose?
Boris.
Boris. Well, he's at home, so we would be able to get him on the phone.
Why not? He's still working. He's still getting a salary. I want to talk to him.
What would you say to Boris?
What I would say to Boris is, first of all, put a bloody brush through your hair the next time you're on telly, because I want to see you as credible. Secondly, I would say to him, isn't it about time that you put a bit more effort, energy and finance into mental health in this country, especially now when so many people are going to be on their knees from stress, anxiety and pressure. So Boris, get a grip. If you want to offer me a job in cabinet, I'm more than happy to do it. But you'll need to absolutely deal with your haircut first.
That's hilarious.
That's good. So post-virus isolation, where would be the first place that you would visit? Could be anywhere.
Post-virus isolation. Well, I'm due to go on the holiday of a lifetime in June. Yay, go me. Which I'm kind of starting to realise perhaps I won't be. So I think it would have to be somewhere with some open space, with some sea breeze and with the opportunity to just walk freely.
Northumberland then?
Northumberland indeed. I've actually been looking at little holiday cottages.
Oh, it's lush. It's lush. Okay, so the question we ask all of our guests, if you could get into a time machine and go back and sit down with 18-year-old Andrea, what advice would you give to her?
Oh God, where to start? I think based on my experience, my strongest piece of advice would be don't put up with it. If it's not right, walk away. Because actually in the long run, it'll come back and bite you on the arse. There's so much I learned from that period in my life in terms of learning about myself, but also learning that perhaps you never really know people. And I put up with so much for so long. I was desperately unhappy. I didn't know how unhappy I was until I came out of it. So I think the best piece of advice to my 18-year-old self would be have the courage to walk away from anything that isn't right for you. Once you've tried to fix it, walk away.
That's great advice.
Very good.
So if somebody's listening, what's the best way of getting in touch with you?
If anyone wants to get in touch, my website, andreanewton.com, is probably the easiest place to find me. And there you can also download the free Stay Safe, Stay Sane top 12 tips. But equally, I'm all over LinkedIn, moaning and ranting and generally raging, as people will find. Also on Facebook and Twitter, nobody is immune. That's something that I genuinely believe. So there's not many places that you can't find me. I'm a bit like water. I get where a rash wouldn't.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time today. And
educational.
It has. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.